Welcome, everyone, back to the Divine Feminine Healers podcast. Back on the episode again is Marina, who is a compassionate somatic coach. I absolutely love following her on Instagram, which I know you all will if you're not already following her. And I'm so grateful to have you back on the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited for and I love the name. I don't think it was named that before, right? You changed the name?
I changed the name, yeah. A whole
I
new.
love it. I love it.
Yeah, and that actually brings me to my first question. I ask this for all of my guests because I think the divine feminine expresses herself so uniquely in each of us. So I'd love to hear, how does the divine feminine express herself through you?
I feel like when I allow my feelings to be expressed, it's kind of like the weather in Costa Rica. I was laughing about this the other day because literally it's like sunshine and then crazy rain and then sunshine again and then, thunder and whatever thing, like all these weathers in one day. And that's exactly how I see like just the wild, awesome feminine is like just accepting those parts of us that are all over the place and it doesn't mean anything about us, but when we express it, we don't hold it and we let it, roar out. It just feels so good.
Oh, I love that. What a beautiful connection of noticing that with the weather. It's so true. It's like we really need to tend to these wild emotions, these big emotions that all of them are safe to feel and express. And there's so many versions of the divine feminine. Like in Vedic wisdom, it's always referred to the goddesses. And there's not just one goddess, there's so many different goddesses. There's so many different expressions of that. So I love that a lot. So something that I love about your content is that it's trauma informed perspective. And I just find that it's just what our world needs right now, especially with all the trauma that needs to be healed. But for our listeners, what does that really mean, having a trauma informed perspective?
Yeah, I feel like our world really, really needs that right now for sure. It's really it's kind of starting from not taking people and their behaviors and their actions at face value and really getting curious. What drove this person to do this thing? Why does it make sense that they did that? Even if it's a really crazy thing or it's really wrong, but really like looking at where did this stem from? That's really important. And it also kind of comes back to nonviolent communication. If people are familiar with that, there's like steps of nonviolent communication. And one of the big ones is needs, like identifying the person's needs, your own needs, no matter what they say or do. We all have universal needs. So I really find that really beautiful to look at things that way. And it's also about, this is my personal belief, and I kind of see that trauma informed work is this way. It's like no one is bad. No one wants to hurt another person. No one wants to hurt themselves. But sometimes we do bad things like bad behaviors, bad actions because of something that we went through in, earlier in our life. And if we look at that, it's just so much more productive because then we can shift things. If we're just focused on, oh, this person's so bad, they did XYZ, nothing's going to really change that way. So that's one part of it. The second is the body. Just that's where trauma lives. So really exploring the mind too, but really like exploring the body, the sensations, the emotions, and giving space to that.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I love your work with somatic healing and bringing your clients to come back to body, because that's truly where intuition is birthed from. And our body is just the wisest of them all. Like, of course, the mind, we can see patterns, but it's also a little shaky. It fluctuates so much, but we can always trust the body's messages that it's sending. And you have some great practical tools on somatic healing we'll probably get into later. And when we talk about trauma, I think that's such a sometimes loaded word, I guess I could say, in our culture. And I know if I'm speaking it to someone who is maybe not in this healing space and they see trauma as something excruciatingly painful and intense, And then, in our healing space, we notice that everyone has a certain level of trauma. I can even say this from the Vedic astrology chart. K2, which is the south node, is related to trauma. Everyone has that place in their chart somewhere. So there's trauma that is just naturally going to develop. That's how we build our strength through our sensitivity. So how do we navigate these different levels of trauma, creating space for the ones that have maybe, like some people call it the little t, and then also honoring the ones who had these really dramatic and intense experiences?
I love that question. And I love the spiritual connection. That's really cool. You and I will have to chat about that. I want to learn all about that. Yeah, there is that kind of distinction, the little t, big T, which I use it because some people understand it, but I'm not a huge fan of it because I honestly found out that the little t, which is, little common events. For example, when you were a baby and you were crying and your parents were really busy and they were like, again, like, be quiet. That deposits in our body as little t trauma. But the impact is not little. Like, the impact of that trauma versus, for example, a car accident or things like you said that we think of when we hear that word. And I used to, I don't anymore. I kind of reprogrammed my brain around that. But in the past, when I heard trauma, it was like sexual assault, car accidents, earthquakes, like all these things. And now I understand that it's not necessarily. And again, the impact can be the same because trauma, this is a quote from Gabor Mate, trauma is not about the event. So the event really is irrelevant. It could be someone stepped on you, right? Like, it could be someone rejected you, and maybe you and I will take it very, very differently. So trauma is about what's happening in your body, like your response to the event. And it can depend on so many things because maybe you are not as sensitive to rejection for whatever reason. You have more resourcefulness in that moment. You have more support from people. You have more resourcefulness inside of your body. And maybe I'm extra sensitive to it because of how I grew up, how my mother was when she was pregnant, how my grandmother experienced her life. Like, it goes back so deep. And so that is really the interesting part. It's not the event.
Wow, that's so huge. That was like a psh moment for me. I say this because I have a close friend who's just been through the most traumatic events I've ever didn't even know someone could go through. Just tragically lost her father suddenly, and a year and a half later, tragically lost her brother, and just it's consistent. It's consistent trauma, and of course, being someone who relates to being an empath and being there for other people, I wanted to show up. But in that, I also simultaneously neglected my own needs and wants, thinking like, well, this does not compare to that. Like, I can't even imagine, and I still can't. I cannot imagine what it's like to live in that life with all that trauma, but it made me deny my own, and it made me kind of avoid that inner work. So I love that creating space of like, but what does it feel in your body? And I think also, like, again, maybe our community, I can kind of like hear voices in my head of like what they're thinking. Like, well, what happens with maybe like narcissistic types who are just like, oh, playing the victim mode of this happened to me and poor me and not taking any action on it. And I think the difference in what you're describing is taking responsibility for that. Like, it's in my body now, and now I'm taking responsible and I'm choosing something different.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we all have those parts. Like, we all have the victim part, we all have the narcissistic part. So maybe we get triggered by people who are like that, more expressed than us, but we get triggered by it because we are disowning those parts of us, right? So and I changed the whole trajectory of my life personally when I was like late teens, maybe early 20s, and I realized, and I don't even know how, I think it's kind of genius. I don't know how this question came to me because I was not in like personal development or anything, but I just realized that I really enjoy being the victim. And I started to ask myself, what do I enjoy about this? And that really opened up a whole world for me.
Yeah, I love that so much. Really getting out of that victim mentality and seeing that we really are just all mirrors to each other, and those triggers are just showing us maybe what we want to step into. Like, wow, that person can express their trauma, but I'm holding mine in. Like, I'm kind of jealous of that. I wish I could express mine in that way.
Yeah.
And I like how you link everything to childhood. I think doing inner child work, and there's so much science studies of how from 0 to 7, that's when the brain is most malleable, it's in that theta state, and we can really start to embed these emotions and these traumas in the body, and they end up creating these issues in our life that we're not even conscious of. So what happens though when someone has difficulty going back and remembering that childhood connection? Even so often when I take this through clients, initially there's this almost like this block where it's like, I don't know the earliest that happened, because there hasn't been any reflection really on childhood. It's like I had a fine childhood, like I was taken care of. How can you guide clients to really understand and dive deeper into understanding the root of it?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I want to say is you talked about 0 to 7, and that's really very true. And I just wanted to explain so we even understand trauma even more, is that we're so vulnerable at that time, right? So maybe, and so dependent on our caregivers. And when you think about it, then we get to 10, maybe we feel like an inner sense of, I can say no, or I can protest this thing, right? But like the younger we are, and that's why babies can be so traumatized by seemingly little things, like mom being busy and being like, don't cry, I can't deal with this anymore, because we are helpless. And what happens when we are in a trauma response in adult life? We feel helpless. We go right back to that space. So of course, during those ages, we are most vulnerable. We have the least resources. Any little thing will feel huge. So I just think it's so fascinating to understand that. And when it comes to your question, this is why I love somatic work so much, because we can have trauma, not even just from ourselves. First of all, as you said, empaths, like I'm sure a lot of your audience is, and I am for sure in and out. And not only do we carry our own traumas, and even from, like you said, like we don't remember when we were babies and all of that, when we were in our mother's belly, from other people, we pick up from other people, and all of us carry the traumas of our ancestors. We carry, and there's so much like science even behind this now, which is so cool. I find that sometimes when I even say, please, I release all energy and all emotions right now that are not my own, and I'm connected to my body. So I don't say this from my head as like a thought, but I feel my body feeling really heavy, and I tune into that energy, and I'm like, is this mine, all of it? And then sometimes yes, and a lot of the time it's like, no, not all of this is yours. So then I say that sentence, I'm like, I release to the earth all of the energy and the emotions that are not mine that I'm carrying right now, and I just feel so much lighter.
Wow.
It's so nice. But in general, the beauty of somatic work is that the body speaks. It just speaks to us. So I can give you like a few really interesting examples from working with my clients. One is, for example, I was supporting a client, and she was like having her eyes closed. She was like fully in her body, and she was crying. Like she was just really, really, really upset and crying a lot. And I said, I'm not leaving, like the session's about to end, but I'm not leaving until you become regulated. Just so you know, I'm going to stay here with you. And she goes, I don't believe you. And that just was so, like, you can't get those answers when people are just talking from their minds, it was her body spoke. And I'm so grateful for that, because it gave us a lot of information that makes perfect sense. Knowing this client, with her life story and everything, she doesn't believe that people will stick around because of her early childhood stuff, that she actually didn't remember for a really long time. She didn't exactly remember, because as a child, she was very dissociated from those things because they were just too much. But her body remembered. And then this impacts how she shows up in every relationship in her life. So those are the clues, And then another example is a client was also kind of like in this meditative state, and I said, feel the arm behind your back supporting you. And she said, no, it's really weak. Like it's not even, it's almost like not there. Like I don't feel it. Right. So all of that, it just gives us clues about what is the life story of this person, where did this person come from? And she wouldn't be able to explain it to me in words, like in thoughts.
Wow. It's so crazy because we know so much more than we give ourselves credit for. And I do the same thing where it's like, okay, tap into your body. Where do you feel it? What is the image, colors? I very much kind of do some type of art therapy with it. And literally every single time there's a visual, there's a thing, like the body knows, it comes out right away. And there's also, I think, more compassion for tending to, like you were saying, when it wants to come out, because of course, trauma, we can want to block that out. We don't want to remember it. And certain things will kind of be revealed when they want to, when you feel like your body is safe enough, the nervous system has stabilized enough. So then it can come out when it needs to. I think is really powerful.
Yeah, exactly.
So you talk a lot about well, actually, before I get into that question, I want to. So I'm thinking and I'm imagining you working with trauma clients that have endured a lot of trauma and maybe haven't done any really somatic work before. And I imagine that a lot of your clients kind of have like a complex trauma going on. Like it's not just one trauma, like there's a lot of things clearing up here. And I imagine, like, how do you manage that? Like there's so much going on there. Like, where do you even begin in a situation like that?
Yeah, so it really depends. I do work with clients often that have done a lot of personal development, maybe like more mental, mindset work, blah, 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 but they haven't gotten to the body. But that is super helpful. For example, I work with a client who's done a ton of spiritual work and a lot of spiritual bypassing in there too. But that is such a resource. Like she is so well resourced through that, meaning she has that to lean on that gives her more safety. She has more capacity, like you said, to access those traumas that she hasn't for many years. So there's a big difference between clients who have, depending on the type of trauma and the amount and how much they've done work with it. And I work with the gamut. Um, and so I kind of gauge it. Like in the beginning, when we're building trust and we're getting to know each other, I will start to ask little questions like if they say, "Oh, I had a shitty day." How do you know that? How do you feel that in your body? Some people literally don't know. They're like, my body feels like nothing. I don't feel anything. So that to me is a very big clue. Like slow down, slow way, 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 way down and build that really slowly. Okay, well, if you look outside and you see a tree that you really like, what do you notice inside of your body? So that is like, it's a very, and I feel able to carry that because that was me. Like I would, within 10 minutes of somatic sessions, I was asleep because I would just dissociate like so badly. I never lived in my body. I was always in my head, always, my whole life until I started doing this work. So I really understand that in my own body of how overwhelming it is because as you access your body, you're getting in touch with a lot of trauma that you maybe know you've had, but you've never felt. And then all those sensations and emotions are just like too much. So I start this like super carefully, like how can we feel it a little bit today? How can we imagine that it's like a pool and you're walking around the pool and you're looking at it, but you're not swimming in the pool. You're not even putting your legs in the pool. You're just looking at the pool. And then tomorrow, maybe you can dip your toe. And so we like build up to that.
Wow, that's so helpful. I love taking it in the bite sizes, and especially for our listeners who may feel disconnected from mind and body, and just starting on that base layer is like really good tools for that. And I kind of just want to circle back talking about the spiritual bypassing because it's so interesting. I just had one of my mentors who grew up in a Vedic community and just learning Jyotish and Ayurveda and yoga off the get go, but there's such a disconnection to body when you're constantly relying on those outsourcing your tools. And growing up in a Christian Catholic setting. I find it's the same theme, disconnecting from body, giving away your power to something else. And then when I went into kind of Ayurveda and yoga at first, it was still kind of, it kind of had that like resonance and the residue of it. So it's so funny, there can be such a disconnection from mind and body when even the science, if you get to the core of it and how they taught it 5,000 years ago, was meant to be in body and connecting more to it. So no matter what part of the gamut you're on, like you could really fall for that disconnection, dissociation from body if you're not on top of this type of work.
Yeah, and it's also hard work. Like, let's be honest, it is not easy to sit with your emotions. Like, it's overwhelming, it's scary. We as humans just want to avoid it. And even the way that our brain is built, our brain and whole body is built for survival. In survival states, we don't have access to emotions. We don't have time to be like, I am really scared of this lion right now. No, I'm thinking, where do I run? What do I do? Can I fight this lion? Right. So that's kind of our ancestors. So it makes so much sense that like emotional processing came way later. And also people, all of our ancestors, I mean, for me, it's like down to my grandma and my mom. So that's not a long time ago. They were so much in survival mode, just like in their lifetime, like money and where to live and immigration and all these like very scary things that, I immigrated to Costa Rica, but like, or I don't know if I immigrated, but I moved. But it's so different from like how my parents immigrated. They didn't have the internet. They had no idea, like it was so unpredictable, right? And they had a child. So all of these layers, like, of course, they didn't sit with their emotions.
Sure.
And then all of that, like, I had a really amazing session with Mark Wolin, who I highly recommend to everyone. He works with intergenerational trauma. And what he said to me was like, all of the emotions that your grandma has suppressed like her entire life, and your mom kind of suppressed you. And instead of becoming like processing it, she just became really, really highly sensitive to everything, any noise, sound,
Wow.
sight, like anything. That's what you have, that's in your body now. So you have to process that. So a lot of us have those. And so it's much easier to say, I'm really grateful for my life when like actually no, I'm pissed today, or I'm like really sad, and like I have expectations that are not being fulfilled, and that makes me sad. And I used to be like, but I'm grateful, but I wasn't.
Oh, I feel you.
So
I literally did the same exact thing. And I was the most miserable in my life. And I was like, I'm doing my gratitude practice every day though.
yeah, but I'm writing it on a piece of paper. It says I'm grateful for these 5 things.
I know, gosh damn it, I'm freaking grateful. And then I'm like, literally, I'm so disconnected from my life. And I wrote a blog post about that a while ago, actually, because it was when the Brene Brown era was happening. I was like, all for it. And I was like, yes, I could change my mindset. And I was like, but I wasn't feeling my feelings and allowing myself just to be upset at that time of my life and to grieve. And I really love that you bring this ancestral piece to it because, again, this is what we say in astrology as well, is because you get, I think it's like, 25% is your own karma, 25% is father's lineage, 25% is mother's lineage. And it's like, these are just not yours to carry and you don't have to carry them anymore. But it also gives an opportunity to you to connect to your ancestors. Like, especially in the spirituality world, we love talking about spirit guides. And that was for me, I was like, oh, some fairies and angels are like above me, how incredible. And then I realized majority of my spirit guides are going to be my ancestors that, have been passed on the lineage. And this is an opportunity for me to connect with them. And actually the work that we're doing, call us contract workers, because a lot of us were assigned from our ancestors to come here to break the cycle in our family's lineage. Like you said, it's been passed down for years, and you're the first one to break this cycle is just freaking massive. But that's a lot of work to do. That's a lot to do, and you need help. You got to ask your ancestors for that guidance on that.
Yeah, I love that. And I definitely feel that assignment like hardcore. And the fascinating thing that I love, this is actually one of my favorite pieces of client work lately, is like we do kind of these ceremonies where we see all the women and all the men in the family, you know, all the ancestors like gather together, and then you're kind of breaking the chains of, and you got to feel that of course in your body, but you're breaking the chains of particular cycles, but then you're creating these golden, I don't know why, like light, you know, light connections to these people, because we feel like, you know, it's so interesting when I explore my thing with productivity. I feel like I have to be really productive because that is how I connect to my grandma. And she was always, and kind of still is, like so productive. And that is kind of how I honor her in my subconscious, right? But as soon as I break that, I can see actually it feels so much more beautiful to just love her like unconditionally for who she is. And that's it. Like I don't have to be productive and she doesn't have to be productive so that I love her, because that feels so much better in my body to just like love her and honor her. And then I can actually get her wisdom, because we can inherit trauma, but we can equally inherit wisdom, right? So I can, through that process, I can get the wisdom piece more than the trauma piece inherited in me.
Oh, I love that so much. I resonate with that exact dynamic. Honestly, I have a very like Italian heritage, and I have this little Nona. I call her Nona Rose, and she just is like, I don't know how she
Fireball.
fireball, like doing eight ladies' hairs in her basement. She has this like huge, like old fashioned like hair dryers, everything from the 70s. It's fabulous, but like I just don't understand the amount of energy, but it's so true. It's like, oh, I want to pass that down and that to make her proud in that way. And it's like, let's extract what's at the heart of it here. What it's truly meant to serve is I want to share my soul gifts in a way that's going to be supportive of me and my nervous system. And I don't need to do that by bypassing my physical body and burning out, for example. I mean, that's my story, but that's kind of like the specific example I drew from that.
Yeah, I love that.
So you talk a lot about the fawn response, and I love this because I think, you know, highly sensitive, especially women, we really resonate with the fawn response. And I kind of want to know, how is this developed in childhood? Like, why are we, it was a survival mechanism, but how can we kind of get down to that root of it, of when it was first developed?
Yeah, so again, this, it can be in your childhood, but it can also be, you know, other ancestors as well. And I think that it's the most complex of the survival Fs. So we have four Fs. We have fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And so when you think about it, it's very, very intelligent. It's kind of like that Stockholm syndrome, where like you know, someone abuses you and you start to like them, or you start to identify with them in some way. It's kind of reminiscent of fawn.
Mm.
And there is that really and you know, when I unravel my own layers of this, it's just so fascinating, because there are so many, like so many. Being an empath, always feeling like I don't belong, and the only way that I feel safe is by helping, by coaching, by being a therapist, right? That's like the place it relationally, because fawn is a very relational thing. And so when you think about it, it's just, it's not as primal, I feel, as the other responses. It's like in a way more intelligent, but also like so tricky, because coming out of fight, flight, freeze, even with clients, not so hard. Like I feel like it's not so hard. And even for me, I mean, yeah, I did a lot of work to like learn how to do that. And obviously I still go into fight, flight, freeze. We all do. We need those responses. But the fun one is just so many layers of how we feel safe in people pleasing. We feel safe in being an empath and like feeling other people's feelings and merging with other people and getting lost, and all the boundaries get lost, and then suddenly like me and the other person, we're the same. So I avoid actually myself, like I avoid my own emotions because it's all about the other person. And you know, there's so many ways that this can develop in your childhood. Like if you, first of all, some of us naturally, I feel like I was born to get people. Like, so I get something good from that, obviously my whole career. And like I just get people really easily. Like I have that talent, right? So sometimes I could use it for my benefit, like in coaching and in being empathetic. And sometimes it just blurs the lines too much. So parentified children, like children who become their parents' parent, that is very, very common emotionally, right? This is where fawn is so confusing, because a lot of fawn is emotional rather than physical. So it doesn't mean that your parents were, that you were physically taking care of your parents. In some cases, yes, and siblings. But it can also mean that you were emotionally doing that. And so it's hard to realize, like you said, a lot of your clients say, I had a fine childhood. Okay. Were you sometimes, were you like when your parents got divorced, if they did, were you kind of the person that they came to share things with that they shouldn't have when you were a kid? Or, did they just share, oh, everything is so hard, and you were kind of their therapist? Because most of our parents did not have therapists, right? So they looked for that place to talk it out. Maybe it comes down to, even having abusive caregivers, where the only way that you knew how to navigate it is by being the good girl, but always being the good girl, the good one. Oh, you're such a quiet, good child. Oh, yes, you're so good. You never make trouble. You're just so good. And then you knew that if you were just quiet, that abusive caregiver wouldn't notice you, wouldn't see you. So many layers, but those are just like some examples.
Yeah, wow. So many connections to that, and it's so relatable. And I think it's because it's like adaptability. And like you said, the emotion piece, it's hard. But it really is not manipulative, I don't want to say, but it really is like this growing relationship where you learn how to, you're so hypersensitive, like you were mentioning before, and you're so absorbent of everyone's environment that it just is so embedded in you. Like it's really something I've just been diving into within the past couple of years of like, wow, I've literally had this for so long and it's so wild. Like it just happens naturally. Like the first time I noticed myself in conversations with others and I can ask any questions about that person. And all of a sudden we're diving into their life story. And my favorite response that I get from everyone is, I usually don't share this much about myself with other people. Like if I had a dime and I'm just like, oh no. And then that's when I catch myself now. I'm like, when they say that line, I'm like, oh God, I did it again. And like, it just, but that awareness of catching it ahead of time of like, it's really a muscle to strengthen. My teacher's like, ask people, how's the weather? Nice boots you have there. Yeah, like the basic line questions. And I'm like, wow, so interesting. Is this a conversation? Like I am so not in tune on how to do that because I really relate to my moon being in Scorpio and I love to go deep. So I'm like, cut the crap, let's get into it. What was your childhood trauma? Let's talk about it. Like that inspires my conversation. So yeah,
I am the same way. I feel like I have Scorpio somewhere too. Someone
you
told me
have to,
that.
you give me Scorpio vibes.
Yeah, I so relate. And I don't want to lose that part of me. I love that part of me and I love deeply connecting. It's just, is it an equal exchange? Does it feel good in my body? Like, does it feel, because I had that pattern in friendships where I just became every friend's therapist. And the moment that I needed that back, they were gone. So, and it's just because it comes naturally. It's like if you have a friend who's really good at doing your hair or something and you're not good at that, because emotional support and holding space is a huge skill. Like a lot of people just don't have that. They have no idea how to do that. So it's really, yeah, it's complex. I'm with you. I'm still like very much navigating it and also noticing how comfortable I feel in that role, how safe it is. Like my whole body is like, like the funniest example I have is the other day, someone literally messaged me a voice note being like, if you're going through anything, like if you need support, like I'm here for you. We can get on a Zoom, like just, I'm just here to hold space for you. And I was like, absolutely not. Please go away. Like that was like my first reaction, and I just like closed it. I was like, I don't want to see this. This is really overwhelming. And just like noticing that in your body, you know, it's just really telling.
For sure. Yeah, I'm getting tested so recently, like all the no's and the boundaries are coming up for me. And it's really, you feel power from that. It's really what strengthens, I feel like, that container that we have. I think we talk about boundaries a lot. I don't know. I'm in the spirituality world, so like I hear it all the time, and maybe it can be overused, but I think for empaths, it's like never enough. Like that's my life's work is boundary work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something else that you talk about on your page is the urgency response, which I think is really top of mind. So also a lot of women in our community are just starting out with creating their own spiritual business, very much tied to this hustle culture and the launch and all of this kind of like, and I hear it all the time of, I feel like I'm behind, I feel like I'm late to the game, it's too late for me to enter, or yeah, I wish I would have been doing this sooner. Like I'm hearing grief in that, but there's also this like urgency response to produce, to be on top of it. So how do we choose a non-urgency response when we live in this world that's capitalistic, that's based on patriarchy, and no one else is living like this, but we want to choose it differently?
Yeah, it's tricky. There's no black and white. It's not like you're just gonna live in non-urgency all the time. I think there's a few things. One is catch yourself in the little moments. So for example, for me, a big one is working out. Sometimes I'm like, oh my God, I have an hour and I have to work out and it has to be like this and like this. And it's really the energy behind it. So say you're doing something in your business, like even a small task, and you feel like if I don't do this now, the world will end, you know, like that kind of feeling, that energy in your body. Just pause, like just notice it and be like, oh, interesting. That's where I'm at right now. I am there. And one of those, the capacities that we tend to lose when we are in a trauma response and when we have experienced trauma is choice. So we kind of feel like I have to do this now, and it's the only thing that I can do. There's no other way to do it. Like I can't outsource it. Just all these things, right? So notice and pause and ask yourself, okay, hold on. Is this urgent? Actually, probably not. Urgency, when you think about it, it's life or death. It's when you're dying. It's when you have to save someone from dying. So whatever it is not urgent. So for me, it's like priority to pause and regulate myself. Whatever I need to do, maybe putting my feet on the ground. Maybe, you know, I share a million tools all the time about regulating yourself. It can be the VU sound. The VU sound is very regulating, making the VU sound. It's kind of like chanting and Om and all these things,
Yes.
you know, very similar idea. So really grounding yourself and pausing. And after that, you can access your mind better and you can ask yourself, is this urgent? Can I outsource it? What are my choices? Is this my only choice? Like I have different choices. That's one piece of it. And, you know, just in general, what are you getting from urgency? Like why is this good? You know, we tend to focus on these responses being really bad, like productivity is like really bad. But the other day, my coach and I just like went off on productivity, just how much pleasure. And we were kind of like joking around, but it was also serious. Like, I feel so much pleasure from being productive. You know, I feel so much pleasure from that. Like, oh my gosh, I'm working on this project. No one bother me for the next hour. Like, it feels so good. So when you kind of tap into that, the good things you get out of it, why you love it, you get to tap into releasing it more, or you at least tap into the good side of it, right? So that like working on that has really helped me around my productivity, which also has to do with urgency, really helped me kind of slow down more. As funny as it sounds, like seeing how much I love it has helped me embrace slowing down.
I love that. And it kind of comes back to just knowing what that core need and want is and how you can really fulfill that. Because off of that, I was thinking for my own terms, like, oh, when I want to work alone and be alone, that means that, you know, maybe I can step away. I have two roommates and I love them, but like I need alone time a lot. So that's like, ooh, I get that alone time and I get to be in my own energy. And so if I can give myself that core need and want on a regular basis, then that needs gets met. And maybe that urgency and that, for example, like rush to get things done wouldn't be so developed in that sense.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so the last concept that I want to talk about is this archetype of the inner critic. So in Ayurveda, we have the doshas, there's different archetypes that we have, and the pitta dosha that tends to be out of balance when it is mentally and emotionally tends towards this inner critic. Constantly judging ourselves. Again, I think it kind of has remnants of this urgency response of like, oh, I should have done this sooner. And this really leads to burnout. And I'm curious, what's happening here from your trauma-informed perspective?
Yeah. I highly recommend the book on CPTSD, Complex PTSD by Pete Walker. Also a very, very, very triggering book, but also just so eye-opening. And he really dives into this concept of the inner critic and the outer critic. And it's kind of, you know, when you're a child and someone hurts you in some way, and undoubtedly that has happened, like your caregivers especially, you don't think they are bad or they are wrong, right? Because you need them, you depend on them for life, you depend on them for surviving. So immediately you would think, how am I bad? How am I wrong? What did I do wrong? So this is the deeper layer. Like for me, I grew up with very, very, very critical everyone, every adult. So obviously if that was you, like, of course, and you equated getting love through that, of course you will be self-critical because their voice becomes your voice. So that's pretty obvious. But I feel like the deeper layer is like, how did someone disappoint you or hurt you when you were little, even when you were a baby? And then you internalize this. You internalize it, meaning I am bad. If I wasn't bad, they wouldn't do that. How can I stop being bad? So it's really fascinating to look at it in that way. And I have to say that I have shifted this so much. Like there's so many things that I keep working on, like the fawn response, you know, it's very, very present for me. This piece of at least the inner critic in my head, at least, is pretty much, I would say, gone.
Wow.
And one of the things that helped me so much is the mindful self-compassion workbook, which also has a lot of somatic elements in there. So for anyone struggling with inner critic stuff, like definitely get that workbook. It's amazing. It was developed by two researchers from UCSD, which is where I went to school. So that makes me very happy. And it's science-based, and it's like this curriculum of different exercises. You know, it's very practical to evaluate this. And you know what? I really believe that we are empaths. We are so compassionate to other people. And we can actually really use that skill to be compassionate to ourselves. So one of the things, just one exercise, I think it's in there, but I don't even remember, but I use this quite a lot with clients, is like really feeling the love that you have for your puppy, your kitty, your kiddo, someone else's child, your niece, your nephew, whatever, like a person or a creature that you just love unconditionally, and then feeling that for yourself. And it's a feeling, so we can feel that for anyone. Like it's just our feeling in our bodies. We can turn it towards ourselves, and it works really, really well.
Oh, I love that. You have so many good practical tools and techniques. That's like my fave. I'm like, let's talk about it and then let's put it into action. So I know our audience is walking away with so many tools and techniques. And I just love to hear from your own personal practice. Like, what is your favorite current somatic healing practice or any other tools that you're using right now that you're really loving?
Yeah, it's always really changing. I'm like a lifelong learner. But right now, you know, as I moved to Costa Rica, I felt very, very ungrounded and unsafe. I did a lot of practices to feel grounded. So the VU, as I mentioned, there's also the butterfly hug. So I recommend everyone just like Google it on YouTube and you'll see it's a really sweet practice. Those really help me feel grounded. And something that's really interesting and I feel very relevant to your podcast is something I'm learning from my coach right now. She's on Instagram as Anxious Love Coach. She's a relationship coach. And she told me something really interesting. She was like, you are very masculine in your approach to somatics because you're always like sitting and observing your emotions, sitting and observing your sensations. And that's a very masculine approach, which is good, but we also need like the feminine counterpart, right? Which is expressing. So she teaches this and we've just started practicing it and I already love it. And I've started doing this with my partner because she was like, when he pisses you off and you're like, oh man, please don't do that. He feels you're gonna kill him, like you feel like you're boiling inside, but your voice is like, come on, please don't do that. She was like, what if you express it? So and he loved it. It's so funny. I started being like, like just expressing my anger, and he just like cracks up, and within seconds, like our argument is over. And wow. It's just so funny, but it's really like getting in tune with your emotions and observing is the first step. You have to be able to sit with your emotions, and that's of course a practice and takes work. But then you like express it out, you know, you yell and you can do this by yourself. You don't have to do it at someone, obviously, but it's like you yell or you roar, or like you just fully let that emotion like guide you to do whatever thing. So really cool. I highly recommend learning this from Natalie. She's amazing.
Oh, I love that. That's so tangible. And I love that because it like diffuses the situation so quickly because you're able to bring laughter back into it. But at the
Yes.
same time, it's like so healing. And I think, you know, the throat chakra is so healing, especially for women. Like we talked a lot about basically visibility piece and a power piece. And that's where our power is, like really being able to express ourselves in that way. So that aligns so well. And I think something that our listeners will do really well with. Thank you so much for being on. Like, I literally can't wait to re-listen to this episode a bunch and take in all the wisdom that you have. And you share so many good other practical tools and techniques and really divulging and breaking up these concepts of fawn, flight, fight response in really digestible terms. So I'll definitely link your Instagram on here so everyone can give you a follow. And of course, you give so many practical tools, but it's so different when you're working with a coach and being held in their space. So how can our community work with you and get more of your magic?
So everything is on Instagram. It's always kind of shifting and changing. I have a one-on-one wait list and you can fill that out. And then the group, I was going to say the group, but we already started. But I'm probably going to do this group again because I'm already in love with it. It's so much fun. And then I have online courses as well. So all of that information is on Instagram, and there's different price points, which is really nice. Like my cheapest online course is like $33 and you can learn so much from it, and then all the way up to, you know, one-on-one coaching. So you can really choose what feels right to you.
I love that so much. I'll have that all linked in the show notes so that you all can get to know Marina way more and start to heal traumas and really connect to your body. It's so powerful and potent.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you again for being on. I just love this conversation. I love you. And yeah, I cannot wait to share this with everyone. All right, everyone. I will see you all next time. Thank you for tuning in.